Not working.
There are at least 3 more seats up here, if anybody would like. Good morning. I'm sorry we couldn't get a bigger room. And welcome to the 5th event in the Examining Division's continuing seminar series entitled Copyright, A View from the Other Side. We're delighted this morning to have with us Leonard Feist. Now, to properly introduce Leonard, I have to do something that's kind of unique. In my experience of introducing people, I have to begin before he was born. Okay?
That's usually the way it happens.
At any rate, most of you are probably familiar with the name of Leo Feist, who was Leonard's father, and he was a pioneer in the popular music publishing business in this country, as you know it. Getting on to Leonard, he was president of the National Music Publishers Association, the trade association of the popular music publishing business, which he joined in 1966. He semi-retired from that position in January of 1985. Maybe he will explain to you what he means by semi-retired. The association was founded in 1917, and its membership includes nearly every major publishing company and many smaller establishments, representative of all facets of the industry and of all sections of the country. Mr. Feist has been engaged in publishing in various roles throughout his entire career. After graduating from Yale, he joined his father's company, and then when Leo Feist Incorporated was sold to MGM in the late 30s, he engaged in publishing on his own. From 1956 to 1965, Mr. Feist was president of the Associated Music Publishers Incorporated, subsidiary of Broadcast Music Incorporated. He was a member of the advisory panel to the Department of State on international copyright policy, and he served on the United States delegation to international copyright revision conferences for many years. In May of 1976, the degree of honorary doctorate of music was conferred upon Mr. Feist by Peabody Institute. The citation noted that the honor was in recognition of his distinguished services to American music. Several years ago, the National Federation of Music Clubs commended Mr. Feist as a dedicated ambassador of music. Mr. Feist's wife is a well-known New York interior designer, and she's a lot prettier than he is. Mr. Feist has served as Vice President of the Copyright Society of the United States and the Country Music Association. In 1983, the Copyright Society honored Leonard with a citation. He's only the second individual in society's history to be honored so. I want to read you from that citation. The Copyright Society of the United States of America salutes Leonard Feist, trustee, past vice president, valued member of the copyright community. In gratitude for his counsel, wisdom, eloquence, and inspired support in the struggle to protect and enforce the rights of authors and publishers, and in recognition of his exceptional scholarship as a devoted student of copyright law, and for his accomplishments in helping to shape copyright law, both domestic and foreign. Please welcome Leonard Feist.
If I had any brains, I'd stop now while I'm ahead. I should say that I'm really delighted to be here in Washington to escape the heat and humidity of New York City and to find the refreshing breezes off the river and the stimulating air of Washington. It's unfortunate that my stay in the city is going to be rather long. It's not true. I'm really delighted to have an opportunity to do something that I have said to myself or thought to myself many times, and that is our congratulations and thanks are due to all of you who work here in the Copyright Office, for what you do for us. I incidentally haven't heard any complaints, and therefore I assume that your performance is exemplary. I know it is. And I want to thank you, too, for having me here given me an opportunity to meet you. I do know a number of you from past encounters, and I'm delighted to renew these friendships, even if it's only temporarily. I'm sure that you are well aware that music publishers are your second biggest customer after books, and that's only in published works, because in unpublished works we lead the pack by a long margin. According to 1980 statistics, I have nothing more recent, there were 27,000 odd published music works registered and 92,000 odd unpublished, over 75%. And my sympathy goes to all of you who have the job of examining those unpublished manuscripts. We used to get a couple dozen a week, and that was a rather agonizing issue. But if you get 92,400, and I'm sure it's mounted now, you really are confronted with a wonderful mishmash. Incidentally, it's occurred to me, as you may have, those of you who are mathematically inclined may have figured out, it's over 20 years since I've been actively in the publishing business. And so I am not really well in touch with what's going on with Song Sharks. Are you still getting lots of registrations which are obviously from Song Sharks? Do they register as published or unpublished works? Most. I thought the ad used to say, you know, publish your song lyric, song poem. Mostly unpublished. And is the guy in Boston still operating? Because he's certainly the most prolific songwriter in the United States. What's his name? Lou Tobin? Is that it? Lou Tobin. It's amazing. That name is stuck in my mind. A lot of people who've written bigger hits whose names I've forgotten. But you do, to repeat myself, from my point of observation, a fine job, a fine and continuing job in a complicated endeavor. And my question to you, as I come to the bottom of my first page of notes, is how do we do? How do publishers coordinate, let's say, or how do they maintain the effectiveness of their work with you? Do you have any complaints about publishers? Since I'm now semi-retired, I can't do anything about it. So, through the years, I'm really very pleased to recall that NMPA has had a continuing educational job with the industry on copyright. Some of you here were with us in 1977 when we made a coast-to-coast tour to indoctrinate the music publishers into the mysteries of the new law. We had the benefit then of the incumbent general counsel of the Copyright Office, who always amazed me with his ability to view copyright through a kaleidoscope. That's a very inside joke. And we issued a series of special reports covering all aspects, we thought, of the new law. But that's 8 years ago, 7 years ago. And a question to which I really would like an answer, it's not rhetorical, Is it time now to undertake some sort of a refresher undertaking endeavor on the procedures on the work? Is it time, or are things going now with a familiarity that indicates that people know what they should be doing? Apparently, we're doing all right. Good.
I think they're just shy, they'll tell you later.
Oh, yes, anything said to me in confidence will remain relatively confidential. I'll tell my wife, of course. She can know everything. NMPA, as Jody has said, was founded in 1917, and ever since its beginning, we have been involved in the copyright problems, copyright developments, copyright legislation. We've also directed our efforts to the spread of information about popular music and such statistics as may exist. We are not a statistically minded industry, which is unfortunate. There are a lot of things that many people would like to know about popular music, and we've never really undertaken surveys that would be meaningful. I'm sorry we haven't. I hope someday that this will occur. As I'm sure you all know, NMPA owns the Harry Fox Agency, which licenses most of the recordings released in the United States. It was started back in 1927 when sound motion pictures came along, and nobody really knew how to go about the clearance of rights. These were indeed the first rights that required clearance from a publisher other than the right of arrangement or something of that sort. And so, to create a bridge, NMPA, then known as the Music Publishers Protective Association, established this service, this agency, and it has grown. It is probably the largest mechanical licensing organization in the world. One of our great problems over the years, and continuing and increasing, is the problem of enforcement of our rights, both from the point of view of the private individual who, by reason of convenience, infringes, or the person who infringes for his own commercial gain. Photocopying and piracy of recordings and home taping have become increasingly problems as technology has advanced. And coping with them is a problem which presents no easy solution. As a matter of fact, the solution of it is frustrating. Let me put it that way. I hope in some way that we can develop means of dealing with infringements and dealing with unlicensed, unauthorized uses of music. And there again, if anybody has a great idea, it's so hard to cope with something that takes place behind closed doors. As to the work done by your section of the office, I really have a regrettable ignorance about your work. The last song on which I ever typed a registration form was a peg of my heart. I was a summer intern. And I was taken off that complicated area of work and put on a telephone switchboard as a relief. No, that's a relief to them, not me. Because I never could figure out how to put the carbon in for the second side without its coming out on the back of the first side. Now, I don't, really, I'm blushingly confess that I don't recall the format of the new registration forms. But do you still have to reverse?
No carbon.
And there are no carbons? But you know, progress has been made. The new law was not in vain. I didn't get out of some of my more recent involvements, although as you will see they are not all that recent. But, and none of you here as I look around will recall this, that was the role of the alien property custodian in the seizure of the copyrights of the Nazis, the Italians. There were no Japanese copyrights at that time, except local. And the immense complications during the war of the seizure of these copyrights by the alien property custodian, and post-war, the return of those copyrights to the original publisher and the accounting process of monies received during the war years, and the it wasn't chaos, the infinite work involved in all the renewals which had not been registered during the war period. It, in retrospect, I find it very interesting, but during that particular time I found it extraordinarily irksome. And now I really come to another one of my confessions. I think I've made 3 so far. And that relates to my knowledge of the copyright law. Jody was kind enough to read the citation from the Copyright Society, which incidentally I wrote myself. I find it's easier that way. They don't make mistakes if you write it yourself. But I'm one of what may be a considerable number of people who paid close attention to Chapter 1 of the new copyright law and found it so absolutely engrossing that we couldn't wait to see how it came out. So we skipped Chapters 2, 3, 4, and we went right to Chapter 8. And now, apparently, there is a possibility that Chapter 8 will go through a revision of some kind and, have to reread it. And in view of that ignorance of everything from 2 through 7, maybe you'll educate me. Because I have some questions about work. Do you get many submissions from jails? It always fascinated me, and we were always very polite to everybody except those who were in for life. You never knew somebody's going to get out in 2 years. I'm also fascinated, to be serious, about what passes through your hands and into your ears. I wonder, for example, do you ever see something, hear something that strikes you as great, that stops you in the middle of what may be a rather routine day and say, gee, I'd like to get a copy of that. I'd like to play it. I'd like to hear it. That must be a point of excitement, because the dreck you must look at is unbelievable. For those of you who haven't visited New York lately, a dreck is a local phrase meaning because I think that you see more music collectively than anybody else. Nobody sees as much music as you do. And you probably have perceptions of which perhaps you're not aware, as you are aware. I mean. And then my final question is, what creates problems? What gives you trouble? And I think I'll withdraw that question. But I do have a serious question relating to the immediate moment. Do you have a special section dealing with, well, made up of mature examiners dealing with contemporary lyrics? I mean, is there any way in which your section is protecting your innocence? Because, in fact, well, you may not necessarily see them first, but I would suppose sooner or later you see them all. And this concerns me as a past patron of the Copyright Office and as a citizen of the United States, and one greatly interested in the morality and the assurance of the innocence of the innocent. Some of them pretty good. Well, is there any way I can get to see any of them? Because I've been reading all the newspaper stories, but I can't understand what I hear. So perhaps if I could sit with it, really study. As a matter of fact, it is interesting. The censorship of music has been a recurrent matter during the McCarthy days. The senator attempted to force the United States Information Agency to remove certain works of certain composers from the shelves of the American libraries abroad. Instrumental works by distinguished composers, which somehow or other, in his particular type of non-reasoning, suggested that these were subversive. Pure music, pure orchestral music, should not have been on the shelves of our libraries. I mean, for instance, among others, Aaron Copland, he was subversive, and Wally Rieger, and others. But more recently, Congressman Dingell, recently, 15 years ago, it's recent as far as I'm concerned, Congressman Dingell introduced a bill in several Congresses which would have required that the lyrics of songs be printed on the jackets. But this was because of the drug implications of those lyrics, not the subject matter which is now being examined and attacked. The fact of the matter was that you would have had to prepare a glossary of what all these words meant for anybody to get the drug connotations of those lyrics. As Jody said earlier, I am semi-retired. Would you say that I would indicate what that means?
I was curious myself.
Well, so am I. Well, in the first place, I am not a consultant. For two reasons. One is there's a joke that Lenny Bruce used to tell about how you became a consultant, which I cannot tell you here because of the tape and other considerations. No, I decided that I would prefer to be an advisor. If you're a consultant, people can come to you, and the way it's self-suggested, and they can consult with you. But if you're an advisor, well then on your own momentum, you go and you tell them what to do. It's a preferred, it doesn't work, but it's a great idea. Mostly my activities now are centered in Washington, in copyright, in the international field, which is becoming increasingly interesting and promises some new problems which we've never encountered. But actually, semi-retirement gives, it's a funny phrase, semi-retired. I'm going to have to find a better one, you know. Partial loafing. Words to that effect. But it's a time, too, for reminiscing. And I've welcomed those hours where before I would be writing lengthy letters on interesting subjects and sort of review. I started in the music publishing business when I was 14 years old. That's when I did Pegging My Heart Backwards. And I got fired. And I've always found it a very, very exciting experience. I've had the good fortune to publish all kinds of music, from Century Edition to Stravinsky or Elliott Carter or similar. How many of you know Century Edition? Two? Well, you see, I haven't been connected with Century Edition since the early 50s. Otherwise, many more of you would be familiar with it, I'm sure. In some ways, that was a most interesting experience. Named Century, obviously, because it was founded in 1900, what else? And at that time, all music it was necessary that there be engraved plates for all music, since photo offset, photolithography had not come into existence. My father had the opportunity of buying the plates for 400 works from a printer who took them over because of the bankruptcy of the original publisher. It was a marvelous, marvelous mixture of salon music of the end of the 19th century and classics, Czerny's scales and chords, Beethoven sonatinas, sold for 10 cents a copy. And it was probably the most widely distributed music in the country. It was almost inescapable. I remember when I took my first trip selling music, which almost sold itself, and I liked that. It was the music department in many stores, and when I ran into a complete stock of Century Edition in an undertaking establishment in Vermont, I realized that we had achieved saturation distribution. Well, you know, we think of music in so many different ways, and yet Century Edition represents a type of music that we very rarely think of in thinking of music generally. We published reprints of the classics. I don't like the word, but we published the Moonlight Sonata for 10 cents, later 25. The Sonata Pathétique for Chopin's Scherzo. Amazing that we could do it. And we also published itty-bitty piano teaching pieces, which were the source of the music education of many people, and maybe the reason for some of the tastes we encounter. I mentioned Century Edition because I'm rather proud. I'm very, very proud of some of the things that, by good fortune, I became involved in during my publishing years. But I'm especially proud of Century Edition because we did bring music within the financial means of almost everybody. There are, millions of kids who learned music with Century Edition and who were able to buy music at a dime and 15 cents. When we sold it, we had 4,000 titles, and we gotten to the point where we published Prokofiev easy piano pieces, published almost anything, which turned out to be PD. It was, I think, a real contribution. The method of merchandising, the methods of distribution was quite innovative. And although I'm never going to write a book, I just might write an article about Century Edition for someplace like Notes, because it was a unique variation of the publishing scene. I ran into, over the years, many people, distinguished musicians, whose first encounter with music had been through Century Edition. It's rather nice to realize that that's where a lot of people began. And then the other side of the experience was dealing with contemporary music and making guesses, making judgments. I asked before if you had any hunches or any reactions to the music that you examine. Well, of course, that's what a publisher does. He works on hunches, and if he's got a good average, he does fairly well. In contemporary music, it's only fairly well. And if he's wrong too often, he's unfairly well. I always felt that it was important to publish composers, not pieces, and take a position, and I think that that's in the great tradition of music publishing. That is the basis on which the great publishers of Europe worked. I don't mean to compare myself with Mr. Breitkopf or Mr. Hertel or Mr. Schott, but it was exciting, challenging to start publishing a young composer and see him achieve recognition slowly, and finally, perhaps, to win a Pulitzer Prize and achieve widespread recognition. Because one of the proudest things in my experience is the fact that I published Charles Ives. Now, he was about 60 when I published him, but I was the first person who ever published him commercially. And that was a pretty good hunch. Because at that particular moment, nobody was paying any attention to Charles Ives, except the very cream of the, music aesthetic community in universities and major centers. the experiences with composers and composers' wives is something which in my reminiscence I dwell on. Composers' wives are a very special breed of people and easily identified in the concert hall. The first hand clap that you hear after the performance of a new work, that's the composer's wife. And the last hand clap, after all the other applause has died down, that's the composer's wife. She can also be, particularly if the composer is a rather retiring person, a real pain. But never, never to be compared with composers' widows. I see that I have struck a responsive chord someplace. Composers' widows, by and large, are a breed unto themselves. And if I ever do write my Century Edition article, I may write an article about composers' widows to be published posthumously. I mean, it's truly unbelievable, and I wish I could recite more or recite instances where composers' widows, they're charming, wonderful women, like Schoenberg's widow, Paul Hindemith's widow. Lenya was something else. Lenya Weil, she was a different breed. But there was no God but their late husband, and you damn well better remember it. This comes within the question frame of whatever you might call these remarks of mine, and that is music as a graphic art. As this mass of material passes before you, have those of you who have been doing this for some time noticed a general improvement in the appearance of music? As a graphic art, I think it has improved greatly. I do regret certain things. That is, we have such a limitation of music type. I mean, if you deal with printed matter, other printed matter, you've got hundreds of different fonts, different typefaces with which you can relate the body of your matter that has some meaning to the work being published. But there's a very, very great limitation. I don't know, possibly 2 or 3 different variations on note shapes and the other musical symbols. Dwiggins, the great typographer, once designed a music typeface, which was never picked up anywhere. It was quite interesting and, to my mind, much more legible. Perhaps you've noticed that, well, I haven't noticed myself lately, but when I was noticing such things, it seemed to me that notes were getting rounder and rounder, and they were losing the grace of the oval, most particularly to be seen in French music. The grace in the notes got fatter and fatter, and the page looked heavier and heavier. Dwiggins' design would have eliminated that and brought some light into the page. And the relationship between the type of the title, composer, and the other type matter very, very often didn't have any relationship to the music itself. It almost sometimes in conflict. Title pages, of course, are another area. surely, well, I don't know whether, whether they're still around, a French composer, Paul Armour, succeeded in getting title pages drawn by a couple of young artists around Paris, like Picasso and Matisse and Chagall and Dufy. And there were 11 songs with these fabulous title pages. How it ever happened, I don't know. There are very few instances that I have seen where fine art relates to fine music. Actually, in the privacy of this room, the Paul Armour songs were not all that great, but the concept of persuading a artiste to do a title page for a work for an art song was really an innovation that one would hope would have been continued. I mentioned before about composers' wives, and I realize that I had better cover my rear and mention the growing number of composers' husbands who have perhaps not yet caught on to the technique of loud applause, but who certainly will now that we have had a woman win the Pulitzer Prize. Who knows what the future holds? And perhaps someday a successor of mine will do a bit about the difficulties of dealing with composers' husbands. I have been privileged to take part in the copyright law making process, and in my reminiscences I fluctuate between the glow that I occasionally experience in thinking about some facet, some event during my music publishing years, and my pride in having been, in a small way, part of the process of developing copyright law. I became a lobbyist in 1952, and it had nothing to do with copyright. It had to do with postage, because the postal law at that time provided that books of 24 pages or more could go at a special book rate, uniform for the entire country, but single pieces of music, single octavos and so on, went at zoned parcel post. Seemed inequitable, considering the fact that newspapers, magazines, and had from the very beginnings of our postal system gone at a uniform rate so that everyone would have equal access no matter where they lived in terms of the cost of delivery. And my only experience before that had been selling music to Jordans, Campbells, and Kits, all of whom I suppose are gone today. Kits are still here? Oh, well, gee, it's a shame I don't have anything to sell. Campbell's is gone? No? I'm going to take a walk, but not today. Not today. I thought that they had closed out their sheet music departments. Oh, thank heavens they haven't. Oh, well, no, that's what I'm talking about. A music store that doesn't sell music. I mean, is there anybody on G Street that sells music anymore? Sheet music? No. Well, that's really what I mean. When I say music store, I mean music. But fortunately, I guess, I was successful in getting an amendment to the postal rate law. At that time, Congress still determined postal rates. And I made some friends here in the book business, and suddenly I got involved in the UCC, the United States adherence to the UCC, and the laws which were necessary to conform, changes in law necessary to conform. And there I was, and into the revision process, which was endless and takes a big, big chunk of my reminiscence. One of the fondest memories I have concerns a meeting which took place, an emergency meeting which took place in Kami's office. He summoned a group of us, and I came from San Francisco, which is really a mistake to come to Washington from San Francisco in the middle of the summer, but such were my sacrifices. And the revision process was in a very, very bad state then because of conflict over cable, and Kami wanted to see if we couldn't put together a bare bones bill. But while we were waiting for some of the late arrival, we started talking about the drama involved in this whole revision process. And we came up with the scenario for a movie called Showdown at the Circle C Corral. Now, that in itself isn't such a great idea. The great part of it came when we cast it. Subsequently, I told Tom Brennan, who was then chief counsel of the Senate subcommittee, about the idea, and he wanted to be played by Tony Perkins. But he is the only one who ever had an opportunity to choose his own actor. I wouldn't dare tell you who we cast for the various roles, but those of you who knew these people, or many of these people, can do your own casting and probably come up with equally amusing types. I can tell some of you privately about something.
Turn the tape off.
Oh, no, I can't even do it.
Oh, okay.
I would like, really, and I don't know how long I've been speaking. I've been speaking for years. I'm almost off. Incidentally, I'm not a lawyer. I should have made that clear in the beginning. I'm not a lawyer, and therefore I can speak with complete freedom and authority. I can be positive, but I don't get paid by the hour. Now, I think this would be a very good opportunity, and I've done it publicly, but never in his place. My involvement in copyright in depth really came through my friendship with Kami. It was Kami who encouraged me and urged me to become more involved, who saw to it that I was included in the delegations to revision conferences, the Bern Conference, where we were only observers, of course, the UCC revision conference, the anti-piracy, and the other European conferences, which were really, forgive the locution, but they were enriching experiences to have been there, and I have been eternally grateful to Kami, who I always admired, for giving me that push to do something which has proven to be, in my reminiscence, so warming and pleasant and stimulating. And I think that's a good note on which to end with one footnote, and that is to explain to you why I am here today. I have been promised by Mrs. Rush a home-cooked Southern dinner. And otherwise I never would have ventured out in this heat. And there isn't a deadline on it, but she better watch herself. I am now open for questions to which, if there are any, and to which I probably don't have answers, but I'll try and fake them. Yes.
Yeah, Leonard, I'd like to know what you think the chances are for home taping legislation. Not necessarily this Congress, but
I think they're pretty good. I would say they're very good on the merits. They're very good on the economic consequences of failure to enact some sort of legislation. But we are confronted by an extraordinarily powerful adversary. And so much of copyright legislation has been an adversary proceeding, an adversary situation. When you are faced by the consumer electronic industry and all the inventiveness of the Japanese, you have a tough fight. I do think we will get it, and according to the House bill, so too will you, since the House bill provides that the Copyright Office shall determine the royalties after the original established rates and the distribution. So someone in some other departments could possibly look forward to a glorious future of conducting hearings on the rates.
well, you mentioned before your concern about inability to enforce these rights as technology becomes increasingly brought to the home. And does it bother you a lot? I mean, I can't think of any better system. I wish I could. But does it bother you a lot that all these schemes for home taping, compensation, and so forth have very little connection to the individual whose works are being taped? In other words, it always involves a system where you calculate based on the most popular songs or whatever whose works are being taped. And I don't know how else you do it because of the problems you mentioned, but still, it's very remote from the individual.
I don't either. I suppose you can argue that the works which will be taped most are the most popular works. I don't know whether that's necessarily true. I don't know how you develop a system where you, let's just take jazz. I mean, those jazz records never show up on sales charts. And let's assume that there aren't too many copies of any particular jazz recording home taped. Nevertheless, in all justice, the recording artists and the composers, if they are different people, should be compensated. On the other hand, if I were more alert today, I might think of other instances in the copyright field where rewards and compensations are not necessarily commensurate with either merit or justice.
But it seems
Can you think of
more
any?
and more
I
as
mean, unless I
technology
think-
increases. I mean, we get more and more away from the individual. And I mean, obviously, Europe has had some of these systems for a long time, but they're much more collectively.
Well, the only old system in Europe is a German system, which has nothing to do, well, it does have some, the division does have something to do with popularity of works and logging of broadcasts, but not as closely tied as this might be to the actual sales charts of the recordings, because they've only, have they yet passed taping? I mean, have they yet included tape in their law? Yes. Just now, yes. What concerns me, not more, but as much, and perhaps is even more damaging in an aesthetic concept, is photocopying of music by schools and by churches, I regret to say, because we make some guesses about the percentage of choral music, for example, where the sales are lost because of photocopying by schools, colleges. We've had, as I'm sure you've read, a few experiences dealing with colleges and their photocopying of choral music, along with college over in Virginia, University of Texas. Cases never went to court because they were settled amiably, and they said they would go forth and sin no more. But how do you cope with, I think the number is, let's say, 60,000, is that high schools, 60,000 high schools, all listening to dirty lyrics? I mean, not high school, I mean, well, whatever it is.
Here's the chances of distributing equally or even less. I mean, if you put some kind of a levy on the photocopy machine, there's just no way to tell what's been copied.
I don't think that's the way it could be solved. I think it's possible to solve it by a voluntary license system. Having the technology, the skills, the inventiveness, the technological experience could develop a system where the extent of photocopying on a photocopying machine could be recorded, could be maintained. Book publishers, of course, or rather publishers of periodicals, are doing that through the Copyright Clearance Center. Not all publishers agree about this, but somehow or other a great deal of thought, I believe, should be given to it and to possible systems of equitable licensing. Let's start with the premise that nobody really wants to cheat a composer. That may be an idealistic premise, but let's start with the premise that people are intrinsically honest. But it's just so damn convenient to walk down the hall and make 60 copies of a choral music for a commencement program. I think that a system could be evolved of licensing and of some simple record keeping that would permit compensation to be equitably distributed. Of course, Mr. FEL Publishing does have such a license, and the failure of the Archbishop of Chicago to conform with the license costs the Archbishopric $192,000. So there is a clue that it may be workable.
Sir, could you hold on a moment while we change
sure.
tape?
I mean, that's an hour?
Time flies.
Okay, so back.
Okay.
Leonard, I was going to ask whether there's any possibility for a CCC-like arrangement for music. I think probably many schools and churches are not as knowledgeable about how you go about contacting license commission people or how you go about contacting the publishers and are probably fearful about what the amount of the license would be or what they need to use. Could a CCC-like arrangement work for music as it does for books and material?
I think it's possible. I think it's much more complicated because the sheer volume of titles, there aren't all that many periodicals, learned scholarly magazines, and I think that they have found it relatively simple to ascribe a number to each publication and so on. We have tried, and I think we've done a pretty good educational program. We published a pamphlet about the new copyright law, and we've distributed over 100,000 copies for educators. The church music publishers have a similar pamphlet for their customers. Not only that, we have developed standard forms of requests for permission to arrange, and inquiry plus permission on out-of-print works. In other words, is this work still in print? If it is not, can I print X copy, and if so, how much will it cost me? That information has been fairly widely disseminated. We've gotten great cooperation from the Music Educators National Conference. They've run columns, they've run articles, and so too have the state papers. But I don't know whether we do much more than just scratch the surface by those devices. And to come to an answer, I say, yes, I think that a system could be evolved. It ain't going to be easy. It presents some problems, for example, about the popularization of new works. Promotion of new works. In other words, you don't know what's happening in the field until a year later you get a report. It's a very complex thing. A couple of people are talking about it, and it may happen, because if it doesn't happen, and if the inroads of photocopying continue to grow, there's going to be less and less, as in the case of home paper, there's going to be less and less music published because it's a losing game. You know, the number of music publishers, and you've seen it here, the number of standard music publishers has been decimated. They've been bought, or they've turned over their distribution to someone else. You know, and where are, to those of you who've been around, where are the J. Fishers? Where are the White Smiths? Where are the, name them. Yes, I'm sorry.
Well, before I came to the copyright office, I was involved with a number of high schools and a number of churches, both as choral director and choir director. And I think the biggest problem with that whole photocopying thing is funding, because it's a lot of trouble, you know, to photocopy those octavos. But, for example, I remember, I think the last year I taught, I had a budget of something like $200 for the year, and I had to buy music for 3 choruses. Very often these octavos were 75 cents a piece. And the only way to make up the difference was to have, you know, cake sales and things like that. I think the real problem is with school districts that don't allocate enough money for, you know, sufficient materials to be bought. You know, they'll buy biology books and English books.
And football uniforms.
Exactly, but they will not give the music program enough money to operate it.
Well, that...
The same with churches. You know,
Yes,
they have,
it's a very, very rough problem. Matter of fact, music budgets in general and across the country have been cut. That was one of the first places to slice. And in some places, music has been stripped out of the curriculum. That's another side of the problem. But to be flippant, that's the school's problem, not mine.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, but
this compounds
Yeah.
are a problem.
Right, yeah.
But if schools are, I mean, school systems are so niggardly that they will not fund the purchase of music, and why should we
I agree with
pay
you completely.
and support the school system of wherever it may be?
Well, I'm just saying it might be one way of approaching the problem, to deal with the funding problem. I don't know how the music industry can do that. Maybe they can. But
No, they
rather
wouldn't.
than dealing with it on an individual school basis,
There was a time when we could help and did, and that was under the elementary and high school program, the federal, which had Title IV, I think, provided funds for programs such as music, and so that we were able to lobby, to argue for the increase in appropriations, which in turn would lead to more funds for schools. But those programs have pretty much dried up now since the days of the late, great L.B. Johnson. And federal money doesn't flow. So what other things we could do to, I don't know, music education has some, you know, some very serious problems.
Just as the second part to Linda's question, I've got many friends in public school music who say if it weren't for photocopying, they would have no program. I wonder if the funding of the school music programs is not a community issue, and if the music publishing industry could do more to educate the community with information that without the community support, you see that there's pressure to reduce the community tax base, and that causes the school systems to reduce their expenditures.
Wait till it's not deductible under a new tax system.
So I wonder if there's any possible response from the publishing industry to the community itself, the source of the income.
Well, not the publishing community alone. I don't know whether you've ever heard of the American Music Conference, which is made up of all elements of the music industry involved in the sale of products. With the band instrument manufacturers, string instruments, guitars, retail music stores, and so on. They have had an ongoing program to persuade, or rather to provide the materials for local people to persuade school boards or citizens of the community that music is important in the curriculum, that music is a core subject, not just a frill. And they've made some headway. Matter of fact, the most dramatic thing they did was to defeat the proposed complete elimination of music education for the Chicago schools. It was a tremendous, this was 5, 6, 7 years ago, tremendous demonstration in Chicago with a parade, and Benny Goodman, a product of Chicago's school system. And they did defeat the initiative to cut out music education because it's just, let's teach driver ed, forget music ed. But there again, we're talking about a massive program, and truthfully, the American Music Conference has not been well enough funded, even though the industries have been quite generous. The conferences goes back a long time. And it depends on what sums of money seem to be a lot. I mean, they've had years in which they've had a budget of $300,000, but it doesn't stretch. So I don't know whether there is enough money anywhere to do the comprehensive, effective public relations, civic relations job. I don't want to take it now. I'm semi-retired. Yes, sir. Oh, yes. Yes, there's several initiatives in which the administration has linked trade and observation of the rights, the intellectual property rights, in the general program of the program under which the government gives tariff preferences and financial aid to developing countries. And I can never remember the specific name. It was just extended for another 10 years. That now provides that the president may cut off aid to a country, Korea or Hong Kong or Singapore or whatnot, if they fail to respect American patents, trademarks, and copyrights. Then, too, there was the Caribbean Basin initiative, which really stemmed from the satellite sniping in Jamaica. And Jamaica is not a member of BRIN, isn't it, Waldo? Jamaica is not a member of BRIN, is it? No. But nevertheless, Jamaica gets a lot of help from the United States. And this is in the Caribbean Basin Initiative. Aid may be conditioned on the attitudes and conduct of those countries. There's a whole big program going on, or perhaps it has now been realized, concerning books in the Dominican Republic. And there have been some very, very weighty people involved in the implementation of that program. You can quote me. So this is really a new approach, and it could be quite effective because those countries, particularly in terms of record piracy and in terms of bringing out spurious Levi's or other American products, those are the places where this takes place, and then are imported into the United States, adding insult to injury. It's bad enough that they export them to Australia, but to send them back to us, that's one too many. I think it's sort of new. I know that there's been positive progress, positive results in the Jamaican satellite reception situation, which I believe has now stopped, and in the book situation in the Dominican Republic. Both of those I know to be positive. Where else something heartening has developed, I don't know. But once again, the renewal of the program, I never think of it. Yeah, general system of, I don't know why that always escapes me. That's only a couple of months ago, and for the first time it includes the intellectual property provisions. It really is encouraging. We have, as you may know, for the first time, a cabinet, sub-cabinet level in the executive branch on intellectual property, and the various departments, I mean, Commerce and other departments, state, are working on this realistically and energetically, and it's good news. Yes, sir.
You spoke earlier about censorship, and I've read recently in the paper that there's a movement afoot to attempt to assign ratings such as G and PG and X to songs based on the content of the lyrics. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that it should start here. I mentioned before, I asked before if you had a panel of mature examiners who determine whether or not these lyrics contain any salacious material or incitement to violence. Well, I guess you don't have one. Maybe it's because
Only
you're...
on an informal basis.
You mean you're passing around it? Hey, look what I found. The record industry responded to the communication of this ad hoc group of congressmen's wives and women in positions of influence in Washington who have been spearheading this. And incidentally, there's a hearing before the Communications Subcommittee on the 19th of September on these lyrics. They asked the record industry if, in a sense, they wouldn't establish a rating system similar in a way to that which the motion picture producers initiated a number of years ago. Well, the reply, if I recall it correctly, was no, we cannot establish a rating system, but we can in some way flag a recording which may be offensive on one or another of these bases. They also wanted the record companies, the record stores, not to exhibit albums with lurid covers, SM stuff. But the record industry can't tell the music store what to do. They keep it under the counter, along with the fake books. No, can't do that. Fake books, I forgot those. The hearing on the 19th will be interesting. I look forward to being there. And the letter that Stanley Gordakoff, the president of the Record Industry Association, wrote in response to the communication from this committee was, I thought, very good. I don't remember all of the details. It was 10 pages. But it was a strong letter. Of course, they look at music publishers, too. But once again, by and large, our songs become available through recordings or through broadcast. After all, the broadcasters are subject to the same or greater pressure to censor the material that goes out. I didn't know, like I said before, I didn't know this stuff was dirty, which indicates my innocence and perhaps is illustrative of the high-minded spirit of music publishers who just don't recognize these things when they're confronted with them. I published a lot of sacred music in my time. Well,
Does NMPA have a position on burn? Can you tell us what that is, or is you're not ready to talk about it?
actually, we find it a very dull city. No, we do. We are among the many organizations who do favor United States adherence to burn. And we are very much concerned and interested in the areas in which our law does not conform to burn standards, and where it does. And of course, as you know, Senator Mathias had one hearing on it some time ago when he had Mr. Barshia, and he has promised other hearings. I think we are on the way. Of course, we once nearly got there, but we didn't. I think I feel rather optimistic about our final adherence to the Berne Convention. We have problems, as I'm sure you've heard. Well, if there are no other questions, Jody is taking subscriptions to my book.
And I would like to help with the good cornbread recipe.
Yeah, well, that's where it's going to be. It's going to be good eating and good music go together. Thank you very much.